Hi, my name is Chloe and today we are going to be tackling a very famous topic. Do violent video games cause real life violence in kids in real life? Let's take a closer look, shall we? Now let's put on some scary music. Well, apparently, research has shown that immediately after playing a violent video game, kids can have aggressive thoughts. Angry feelings. And psychological effects such as increased heart rate, and blood pressure. That also causes, if you have high blood pressure, it can be life-threatening as it can cause heart disease and lung cancer. But mainly heart disease. Not that funny, but yeah. In addition, studies that survey large population of kids on their game playing habits and measure aggressive personality traits or self-reported aggressive acts such as physical fight, arguments with teachers, often find an association between games and aggression. And yet, even when a strong correlation is found, researchers cannot say that playing violent video games causes such behaviour. But I don't believe that, to be honest. It could be that kids with aggressive tendencies gravitate towards playing the most violent games. The most compelling studies are ones that track kids over a period of time. For instance, a 2008 study published in the journal Pediatrics found 362 third, fourth and fifth graders in the US and 1,232 youth ages 12 to 18 in Japan over a single school year. Early in the school year, kids can... Hey, where did it go? Kids were asked about what games they played and for how many hours. The more violent content they were exposed to, the more likely subjects were to report later in the year that they'd been in physical fights. Is that every kid? No, it's not every kid, says study co-author Douglas Gentile, a psychology professor at Iowa State University in Ames, but the trend was statistically significant for both boys and girls, he says. And other studies that have lasted 2 years have found similar effects. These so-called long studies start, at least to address what comes first problem, because they measure game playing first and assess aggressive behaviour later. Still, the approach doesn't solve the problem completely. Also, by the way, this is actually my written presentation of Microsoft Word. For instance, it can miss factors that influence violent video game playing and aggressive behaviour, absent or maybe fighting in the home, perhaps. It is also hard to assess that strength of any video game aggression effect because exposure to violent video games varies so much. Gentile says violent video games account for about 4% of the differences among kids in terms of aggressive behaviour. Some researchers think the number is higher. Huseman puts in like 10%. Neither number seems very high, but then everyone agrees that aggression is a complex human behaviour that is going to have multiple causes. That's right, multiple causes. Usually when people are violent, there's a whole set of converging factors, Huseman says. No reputable researcher that I know is arguing the media violence or video game violence is the most important factor. Other known factors more strongly linked to child aggression are a history of abuse, poverty, genetics and personality, and the risk climbs higher when several factors are present in combination. Still, Huseman adds, what's really irritating is when people say it isn't a factor at all, because the evidence is so compelling. Ferguson, meanwhile, puts the strength of the effect squarely at 0%. He says that people are inventing a crisis where there is none. As video games have become more violent and more sophisticated, and the sales of video games have skyrocketed in the last few decades, youth violence have plummeted, he says, citing evidence compiled by various federal agencies. Ferguson, who is not only the scientist critical of violent video games research, but may be the most vocal, say some researchers. Cherry pick data, whatever that means. Measuring a lot of effects and analysing only the ones that show a difference between kids who play violent video games and those who don't. Further, he says some reviews of the scientific literature exclude studies that show no effect for it, and in a few cases an opposite effect, that consumers of media violence showed less aggression. I do not believe that at all. He published a detailed critique of these issues in the March issue of the journal Psychological Bulletin. While researchers and legal types continue their row over violent video games, there are things parents can do, Gentile says. Setting limits on the amount of exposure is important, he says. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommend that kids' exposure to screen time, meaning TV, video, computer, and video games, be limited to 1 to 2 hours a day. And so, Gentile adds, is setting limits on content and talking to kids about why they're seeing and hearingly, challenge it and make kids think it through critically. And I got that, only half of that from the internet. But now I'm going to say my point of view. Now, you may be asking, do I agree that violence in video games causes real life violence? Well, you may not like my opinion, but yes, I think that by playing real life video games can cause lots of violence, because my parents were born in the 60s, the late 60s. They said back in their day there was hardly any violence at all. But based on the era I was born from, me and my twin sister can see violence. But I don't play video games at all, so I'm not violent, as you can see. I've never been violent in my whole life. But I've seen other kids getting violent with teachers, even getting violent with me. And that's caused by playing video games. Well, I do have some friends that play video games, and they're real violent. And ever since this technology has came out, violence has increased. For example, statistics back in the 80s, violence started increasing in the early 2000s, and that's when games came out, computers came out, all this technology came out. So ever since the 2000s, the early 2000s, violence has been increasing since then. And we have to put a stop to that from happening by, for example, decreasing your time in playing violent games. Why not play kid games? Play outside. There is many things you can do outside besides just going on a stupid computer and just sitting there. And you can also have socialization, because by playing video games, it actually decreases your socialization skills, and it also decreases your brain power. So that means that it will result in you getting F's on your test. And it would also increase on no socialization. So you won't know how to talk, and also anxiety will actually skyrocket. And if you don't agree, I don't care. But that's what I think, and I think that it does cause real life violence, because based on statistics, a whopping 65% from the 80s, from the early 2000s, it increased up to 65% with real life violence these days. And we have to put a stop to that. And you should only, and at an average, kids should only be playing on their computers for only between 1 to 2 hours. Depends on how much you like it. But only 1 to 2 hours is an average limit. Thanks for watching my video about this very, this famous topic. Bye!